After the Second World War, the Allies and the Russians built prison camps in which Nazis were to be interned. But in the Soviet sector, many of those imprisoned weren't Nazis so much as critics of the communist regime. Many hadn't committed any crime at all. More than 120,000 Germans were incarcerated in special prisons between 1945 and 1950. Here's the moving story of a man who was born in captivity and whose home was a former concentration camp.
The former concentration camp in Sachsenhausen near Oranienburg in eastern Germany makes a strong impression on visitors. Alexander Latotsky is one of the 40 children forced to spend the first years of their lives here. Along with their mothers, the children were prisoners of the Soviet military authorities who used Sachsenhausen as a so-called special camp after the Second World War.
We had no clothes. One woman told me once that we children wore clothes taken from people who had died. We had no diapers, no shoes or anything else. The women just had to make do somehow.
In 1946, a Soviet military tribunal condemned Alexander's mother, Ursula Hoffmann, to 15 years in jail on charges of spying. 2 years later, in April 1948, she gave birth to Alexander in another camp at Torgau. His father was a Russian camp guard, Vladimir Bryuchkovsky. For the crime of having sexual relations with a German woman, he was sentenced to 6 years in the Gulag and was deported to Russia. After the birth, mother and child were sent to Sachsenhausen. They lived there in miserable conditions until 1950.
1 in 3 prisoners died regardless of whether they were old or young. It was left up to the camp authorities to decide how to deal with the fact that there were children present.
When he came back to visit for the first time in October 1990, Alexander Latotsky was deeply struck by memories of the past.
I was constantly on the verge of tears and I didn't know why or anything. But then I started to work through it all because I thought it can't go on like this. It's doing me no good. So since 1990 I've been working on the subject pretty intensively.
Those years of work have yielded a book which, as the title says, tells the story of a childhood behind barbed wire. It tells a nightmarish story which did not end in 1950 with the dissolution of the camp and the removal of its inmates. The mothers from Sachsenhausen were transferred to prison and their children sent to orphanages.
These days, every penal system separates mothers from children born in custody, but there is contact between them. But the East German system didn't allow any of that. They simply kept us apart from our mothers for years, 7 years in my case. It's just beyond my comprehension. And then in 1957, they let me out of the children's home to go back to my mother. They said to me, "You're going home tomorrow." But it didn't mean anything to me, because I didn't have a home. For me, home just meant a camp or a children's home.
They lived together for 10 years in West Berlin. Then, at the age of only 41, Alexander's mother died from complications arising from her earlier incarceration. While tracing his roots, Alexander came across 70 other people with similar stories. Now, many of them meet once a year at various sites of former camps. Unexpectedly, Alexander stumbled on the trail of his father, whom he thought died long ago.
My mother had told me that he was a camp guard and that he was condemned to death. That's what she told me, and that's what she was told at the time, and she believed it, and so he was dead for both of us.
But Vladimir Bryuchkovsky is alive and lives in a village near Kaliningrad. After 51 years, father and son met in 1999 for the first time.
I've blacked out my memory of first seeing him. All I know is we fell into each other's arms and cried for a good while, like you'd expect.
They've met 3 times since that happy day. The last time was in Germany in summer last year. In the meantime, Alexander's mother's name has been cleared, and in Sachsenhausen there is now a memorial stone to the victims of the Soviet special camps.